Hi, I'm Stefan, the BMW DIY guy, and I want to show you how you can install the amazing Funk Motorsport turbo blankets onto your BMW M2C. Okay, so let's talk about the why here really quickly before we get into the work itself. So here is an example of what we're going to be putting on the car. And you may be asking yourself, what's a turbo blanket? Well, it is literally wrap-on insulation, and this is big and padded insulation that's going to go around the hot side of the turbo. So if you really think about it, you have a hot side and a cool side of the turbo, and one side has all your exhaust gases, which is going to be as hot as it is possible coming out of your car, and the other side you want to be as cold as possible because that's actually going back into the intake of your car, and colder air is denser and it performs better. So it's really kind of a strange setup if you think about it, that you've got as hot as you can get and cold as you can get all within a couple of inches of each other. Then to top it off, especially on a lot of turbo cars, you have your intakes, you have all of this other equipment that's right around, and especially air temperature sensitive equipment that's right around your turbo that's getting hot from all the radiant heat off your turbo. So if you look at a lot of race cars and other high-end, really critical performance cars, they use turbo blankets. Now, I don't have a thermal camera, so to show you the before and after and all of this. Funk has some really great videos on this. They actually have video of one of the guys holding their turbo blanket and literally holding a blowtorch to it with their hand on the other side. They can't feel it. So what these do is a really good job of trying to keep all of the heat in on the hot side of the turbo, which is going to reduce your engine bay temperatures. It's going to reduce the cool side of your turbo temperatures a little bit. And all in all, it's going to add a little bit of performance, and it's going to help the longevity of your motor. There's some great videos also out there of guys doing comparisons of before and after with turbo blankets with really high-end thermal cameras to show you the differences that they absolutely do make. And then also the differences when they have their car heavily instrumented. You can see a little bit of difference in how it performs. So I reached out to Funk. I love their stuff, and I get an opportunity to put them on my M2C, and I want to show you how you can do this as well. Okay, so the car is up in the air right now. It doesn't have to be for this first part. I just have it up on my quick jacks already. We will have to be underneath the car at one point as well, sadly, to get to a single bolt, and I will explain more once we get there. But there's quite a bit on this side that we need to take off. So we're going to need to take off our two top covers on both sides because we're going to need to take our strut brace off. We're going to take our engine vanity cover off. We're going to take this intake out. We're going to be taking our charge pipes out as well. But let's start in the beginning. So at the top of these covers, you've got 10mm little plastic nuts that you quarter turn, and then these covers will come off. You'll also have a plastic pin, a little plastic rivet in each corner. So go ahead and take those off, take these covers off, and then you'll have two 13mm at the top. You have the 13mm across the bottom of your strut brace and on the other side. So once you have those out, you can take this and lift it off. Now, as I will always caution, you've got your positive battery contact right here. I usually don't unplug my battery, and so what I would suggest is cover this with like a rubber glove or something similar, especially as you take your strut brace off and you've got that metal end of this sticking out right here. Don't touch that, right? So be careful as you do that. So let's start in the beginning, follow along kind of step at a time. We're going to take these two top covers off. Again, the three quarter turn 10mm twist nuts at the top, and then our strut brace, and take it and set it safely aside. Okay, as usual, I forgot to mention the little 10mm that's right here, holding a reservoir to your strut brace. So make sure to pull that off as well. It's not coming out without that off. Also, don't drop that little nut, that little bolt. I've done it, it sucks. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to take our intake out. Go ahead and take your vanity cover off. If you haven't done this yet, it just lifts straight off, nice and easy. Set that safely aside. And then we're going to be looking at your intake right here. So you've got a little pressure clip that you press on, and then the plug should come off, and you can just kind of pull this off and to the side. Then you can use a flat-bladed screwdriver to undo the hose clamp here on your intake and get that nice and loose. Once that'll come loose, your intake will come out. It's basically just sitting on rubber grommets. I still need to loosen this up a little bit, but you just back this back off enough, and then you can take this and kind of pop it up and out and pull this out and set it safely aside. And then we're going to be looking at taking the intake pipes out. We're going to be taking this main pipe for your intake as well. For your air intake, we're going to take this off as well. It's because we need to make sure to get down in here. All your turbos are down this side of the motor, and we need to be able to get to the heat shields that are all across the top. And this is where we're going to have the car in the air, because your heat shields, there's two of them. Both your turbos, front and rear, are stacked here underneath. And you've got, and they're not even really heat shields, they're just kind of these aluminum guards that go down over your manifold and a little bit of the turbos. The rear one can come out. It's got 2 or 3 bolts across the top, and then it will wiggle it and it'll come out. The front one, sadly, has the same bolts across the top, but has one bolt down low that helps hold it in place as well. And we're gonna have to get to that from underneath. So, but we've got to take everything off the top first. So go ahead. Okay, so once you have your intake out, we're gonna wanna start to take out your charge pipes, and then also your intake pipe for your air box on this side. Now, your intake pipe for your air box has a 10 millimeter bolt right here into a bracket that holds this into place. So go ahead and pull out that 10 millimeter bolt and then just gently wiggle this loose, because this sits down in and just, it doesn't have a bracket or a hose clamp or anything at the other end. It's just pressure fit on. So go ahead and pull that 10 millimeter bolt and then gently pull this out and set it aside. Now, the one thing I do want to always mention as we're dealing with all of this, so all of your intakes to your turbos and your air intakes are going to be open. So once we take our charge pipes off, you'll see the top of your turbo right here, also in the back. And these are some reverse Torx bolts that I'll show you in just a second. But I'm always really careful, and I will use like a microfiber or lint-free cloth and put them into all of these openings so I don't drop anything into them, because that would be a huge drag. Okay, so you can take your screwdriver again, loosen up your collars here at the top of your intake pipes, and then at the bottom you have a captured bolt that fits into the bottom of the intake or your charge pipe right here, and this is a reverse Torx. This should be an E8. If it's not, I'll tell you the difference in just a second. But once it's loosened here and this bolt is loose, then you can wiggle the pipe loose, and it's on a little grommet fitting right here, and it'll wiggle loose and come free. Okay, and again, be gentle as you do this. You're dealing with plastic. If you really yard on it, you can break them, which would be a drag. You could also use this opportunity that if you are planning on changing your charge pipes, this is a great time to do it. It's a different project, but if you are changing them, you got to take them out anyway. This is a great time to do it. Definitely check out Keys Motorsports. They've got some great options. I wish I could swap my charge pipes out right now too and just save the effort, right? But go ahead and take those off. So undo the collars on the charge pipe side. That'll get loose. Use, I believe, an E8, and like I said, if it's different, I'll tell you. Loosen here at the bottom, and then there's one here at the back. I'll show you that in just a sec, because we need to take this pipe out. It's a little hard to see. It's just like this one. It's just a little hard to see. You're gonna have to use an extension and a wobble to get to it at the far end. Okay, so let's go ahead and get these out next. Okay, so let me freehand the camera here for a little bit so you can get a little bit better look at what I'm talking about. So, forgive any shadows. So you can see all the intakes are off. You got a lot of room to work with on this side now, and the turbos are right here. A little bit hard to see underneath the towels, but I've got my microfiber towel stuck into the intakes to make sure I don't drop anything or get anything into my turbos. So you can see these silver, they're not even heat shields, they're really just kind of guards, really, that cover the manifolds and a little bit of the turbos. And there is a whole series, 1, 2, 3, 4, of these T30 bolts that go in and hold these in place. So you'll have to take all of those out. You can see that once those come out, this is how we can start to fit our turbo blankets on. So I've got good news and bad news. So the good news is the back will come out from the top. So you'll take all of these out, these T30 bolts out, then you'll take the back one out, and it takes quite a bit of doing. You're gonna have to take it and wiggle and take it and wiggle and take it and wiggle, and it will eventually come out. But I've got some bad news on the front one, which is why the car is in the air, or will need to be in the air, is the front one, for whatever reason, right down underneath a curve right here that you literally cannot see, tucked back behind the turbo right here, is another one of these T30s. So we're going to have to get at that from underneath, which is really just a huge bummer. I wish that was not the case, but for whatever reason, they decided the front one needed an additional bolt down low. So what we're going to do is take these out, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down, and then work on this back one. And you just grab the back one and just wiggle it out, and it will eventually come out without a problem. Okay? So get that out, then we'll get the car up in the air. We're going to take the stiffening plate off the bottom, which is a whole bunch of 16 millimeter bolts with some 8 millimeters around the outside edges that hold on the plastics. So I'll show that. We'll take that off. We'll take the stiffening plate off, and then we're going to have to get at this from underneath, which is, like I said, a bummer. It's not hard. It's just a bummer. It would be a lot easier if we didn't have to. All right, so really quickly, and as I probably you saw in the comments earlier, those are the charge pipes are actually E10s. I just thought I'd mention it as well in case you missed that note. Those are E10s; they're not E8s. So here's the back shield. So as you take those bolts out, I find it's easier to kind of push it back and then get this front edge out, and then it'll just wiggle and come right out nice and easily. So that's not a problem. The front one is the one that gives us the challenge, because the front one is very similar, except there's a bolt like right down here essentially on the front one, and there's almost, you just can't get to it. There's no angle. It's there. The intake for your turbo sits like this. Excuse me, the where your charge pipe actually comes out from your turbo sits like this and shields that bolt. So you have to come at almost like a bend 90-degree angle to get around to get to this one bolt, which is really just a bummer. And we have to get to it from underneath. So, but as you can see, this is out. Now, the one other thing I wanted to point out is that if you notice, there's this extra rail here, right? And this top rail is now loose. So this whole rail that holds some of your wiring harness, because those bolts that hold these shields in also hold this rail in place. So obviously don't lose those bolts, because we're gonna put them back in to hold this rail in place. But with the front shield, you can see it's loose. And even will pivot, but it's pivoting off that lower bolt. So, okay, so if your car's not in the air already, go ahead and put it up in the air. The stiffening plate, which is that big metal plate underneath, is a whole series of 16 millimeter, big 16 millimeter bolts, and all the 8 millimeters around the outside. I'm probably not going to show that just because it's so straightforward. So I'm going to take the stiffening plate off, and then we'll be underneath right here looking up, and I'll show you what we're looking at, trying to get to that lower bolt so that darn heat shield can come out. Okay, y'all, so I'm underneath the car. I'm looking out the front of the car to try to give you orientation of what we're looking at. Okay, let me pan slowly. So here's my downpipe. Okay, so you've got your main cross brace right here. There's a shield. You can see the bottom edge of it right here, which is what we're going to take the 2 bolts out of this shield so we can sag the shield to get more room above it, because this runs right into the bottom of that front shield, and it's kind of in the way to get to that bolt. So this has 2 T30s itself. One, which you should be able to see lit up right there very, very clearly. Now, what you're going to need to do is use a T30, usually a socket on a long extension, and you can come through it from above. So up here, you can come through behind your engine mount right there with a long T30 to hit that bolt. And then there's a small one, well, same bolt, but closer right here, which you can see I still have in, but I've got loose. Okay, so those 2 bolts, this one right here at the bottom edge, and that one all the way up in the middle, which you should be able to see well lit right there above my charge pipe, is what holds this lower shield into place. So I'm going to pull both those bolts so I can sag the shield down. I shouldn't have to take it out, and I don't see any reason to take it out. I just need it out of the way so I can get to that one last stubborn bolt that's directly behind your airbox intake pipe and is exceedingly hard to reach. So, sorry, quick addition, there's actually a 3rd bolt. So again, looking for orientation, looking out the front of the car. I've got it lit up here. It comes down on a flange. It's going to be a little bit hard to see. It's below. So here we go, panning. Here's the frame. Looking up through the frame, you should be able to see the little cutout and it's on the end of that flange right there. So you're going to want to, there it is. So you're going to want to take that out as well. So there's 3 holding this lower shield in place, and then it should be able to drop down. All right, so with that lower heat shield, with all 3 bolts out, I've pulled it down and pushed it forward to get it out of the way. It's not going to come out entirely unless you take your downpipe out, which I'm not excited to do, and so I'm going to avoid it if I can. The good news is we can finally see that rogue 3rd bolt, and this may be kind of hard to see. I'm hoping that you can see up in there now between, so you've got your charge pipe here, you've got the frame here, you can see that aluminum foil wrapped around the pipe, and then you can see that 3rd bolt that's keeping the front heat shield in place. You can actually see it now. So the good news is that means reaching from either the top or the bottom, you should be able to guide in your T30 on an extension now to get that bolt out. I hope you can see it clearly. When I produce the video, I'll probably point some arrows to point exactly what you're looking at. I can see it clearly now. It's just very hard to get bright light on it and a good camera angle, because the bright light on it is directly up through this hole where the camera is now. But that's the final bolt holding the front heat shield in place. So now that you can see it, go ahead and get a medium to long extension, work it into that space, and get that last rogue bolt out. All right, y'all, so I want to catch you up a little bit. So now that that bottom bolt is out, this front shield is loose. Now, let me catch you up here a little bit. So this is that drip rail that runs along this side, like this. So there are a couple, there's a wire harness clip here in the back, so I pulled the clip off. This drip rail is held into place by pretty much the same bolts that hold in your shield, so it's loose. So I pulled it out of the way so I had a little bit more room to maneuver. Now, this is the front shield is quite a bit harder than the back shield for one particular reason. So right here is an oil feed line for your back turbo. And that oil feed line sits like this over the top of this curve in the shield right here. So you have to get it up and around that oil feed line without beating that feed line to death, right? You don't want to crank on it too hard. Last thing you want to do is damage it. So you've got to find the right balance of working this up. So this is down in this position, which is why I wanted to show you kind of after the fact. So it sits in this position, it's held up by this flange that's underneath the feed line to start with, and then it goes around this back curve where it's going around the turbo. So because what you want to do is get it tipped up past the feed line. Now let me get a little bit closer. If you notice, mine's a little banged up, and that's on purpose. So what I did is I took a small pair of channel locks, because I know I'm not putting this back, and worst case scenario, if I had to put these back for whatever reason, this part's not all that expensive. So I took a pair of channel locks because what I didn't want to do is damage my oil feed line. So I took a pair of channel locks, locked it on here, and bent it down and bent it down and bent it down to give me more space to get up and around. I got a little bit of a point on it. That was a little bit of a bummer because it bent right in the middle, but it gave me enough space to get the shield up and tipped this way. Now, the good news there is that now the front 2/3 is free, but this back, that curve sets it deeper down into the back turbo. So then what you have to do is work it up, tip it towards the wheel well, and then work it out. And it's a bit of a challenge. I don't have a one-to-one secret of exactly this angle, tip it exactly this way to get it out. But the first part was getting this front part out past the feed line, tipping it towards the wheel well, and then kind of down and back to get it to come out, to get this back part around the neck on the intake. So, okay, so that's all done. So you got your heat shields out, and now you can see your manifold clearly, you can see the turbos clearly. So all of these things that we're going to wrap and cover with the blankets. One other thing is that my lower shield is still loose right now. That's okay. We didn't crawl back underneath to tighten that up. I'm going to leave that loose for now until I put the blankets on. So let's go ahead and grab the blankets. We'll grab the right one because they're different shaped for the front and rear. So let me grab the correct one. And I think we're going to do the rear first, but we're going to talk through the process itself. So let me grab the right blanket and I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so actually showing some of this is going to be very, very difficult because my turbos are on the car. So what I would highly recommend is at this point, go ahead and go out to Funk Motorsports and take a look at their how to fit a turbo blanket to a turbo for a BMW M3, M4, or M2 Competition. Make sure to check that out. They're going to show you how these fit on turbos out of a car, and you're going to see them in very easy and great detail when you do it. Now, I'll explain it here, but I recommend supplementary, definitely, please. At this point, pause my video, go out and check their video out so you can see exactly what we're talking about. Now, I've got both of the blankets laid out, front and rear. The front has a little bit narrower neck on it. The rear has a little bit wider V neck on it here at the bottom so you can tell. So, in brief, what you're going to do is this is the top that's going to go over the top of your intake of your actual manifold itself. Snake this down under. Now, if you look down at the turbo, you're going to see the actuator arm, which is a little bar with a little actuator arm. Make sure that this goes down on the inside. Your actuator arm will be about here on the inside of your actuator arm. Do not go over the top of your actuator arm. So feed this down and around. This will sit on top of the manifold itself, and this is going to snake around like this. If I can do this, it'll sit like this around right exactly where it meets your downpipe. Now, you've got all these little hooks right here. So you've got springs with loops at either end. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hook one of these springs. So for example, this spring on this side could reach around. You're going to hook it on this side, and then you're going to pull it up and hook here. Now, there are more hook locations than necessarily you need to do. Your pack should have come with springs. It looks like I've got 5 springs total. Quick correction, I have 6 springs total, so that's about 3 apiece. Now, talking with Funk about this quite a bit, there's no one set configuration. What you want to do is have this down and snug. So like, for example, this is going down on your intake pipes. So having a spring that goes here and loops around the back to here makes a lot of sense. This coming down and around your downpipe, hooking here, reaching up and attaching here or here makes a lot of sense. You wanted to have it be snug. You could even potentially just feed these around and call it good. So get these down and set them in. So as we, like for example, this one, and I still have my wires in the way, as I feed this down, I'm going to feed this down and around. And I'm just showing you right at the moment, because what I want to do in a few moments is I'm going to get my spring set up. So you're going to need to squish this in to get it on this side of your oil feed line. And here, let me come down a little bit. So you've got your oil feed line right here. My head's right in the way. Then you've got your actuator arm directly below that. So this goes between the actuator arm and the turbo itself. And you've got this nice narrow neck right here is where your actuator arm will be. So squish this down to get it fit in. You're going to do this on both front and rear. So Funk also recommends that you pre-fit some of the springs. You can use a spring puller, you can use a pair of pliers. I've even had the idea of potentially using a zip tie, of zipping down a zip tie to one end of the spring and then using, the nylon at the other end of the zip tie to feed it around so it gives me something to pull on. So let me get the front one set. I'm going to get it set into place. Like I said, go check out Funk's video of how to fit these on turbos out of the car so you have the exact picture of what you're doing, and then we're going to work to get these fit in. Okay, so I've got the front blanket just laid in here. I've got it tucked down between the actuator arm and tucked down pretty far. And I wanted to show you what I was talking about using a zip tie. So I've got, in positions, I've got a spring here on equivalent on this front one, spring here, and a spring here. And sorry about that. And then, as you can see, so that's that top one right there. And then I've got a zip tie that I can use as a puller that I can feed around, in this case, back around the back of the manifold. On the other one, I'm going to crawl underneath and wrap the blanket around and feed that zip tie up, because I'm going to pull it up to that middle post on this. That may sound confusing, but I think when you do it, it's going to make a lot of sense. Now, the other thing I'm going to do when I'm underneath the car is, remember, this lower shield is still loose, right? So I'm going to take and I'm going to put that lower shield back in place, because I think it's going to be really hard to get to. And I don't want it out of position when I put the blankets on, so they might end up in a strange position. So I've got the front one just kind of laying in place. And I felt like doing the front one first would make a lot more sense, because the back is going to be exactly the same, just a little bit narrower space to get to. I'm going to do the top. I'm going to do the manifold part from the top, reaching back behind the manifold and using my zip tie to pull the spring. I'm going to do the bottom, where I'm going to wrap it around and come around the downpipe and feed my zip tie around. I'm going to do the same thing on the rear. But let's crawl underneath. Let's get that heat shield back into place. Remember those 3 bolts, the low one, the middle one on the flange, and the high one. So go ahead and get those all put back into place. And then we're going to feed this front blanket around and get it all set. All right, guys, so it is on for the front one. And I really like using the zip ties. They work really well for the approach. I showed you how I hooked the springs initially on it, and then the zip ties are long enough I can route them back behind. Like, so I routed it back behind the manifold and then pulled on it to get the spring around to the hook on this side. Now, I will climb underneath in just a second to show you what it's like, but again, you route that lower section down between the actuator and the turbo. Make sure it's not up against the actuator at all. And then there's also a split, so let me grab the existing. So you see this split right here. The split on that front one goes down around where the actuator connects right here. So make sure that it's down and set, that split is set all the way down. Then from underneath, feed it around and under, and I was able with my hand to tuck it up and under. And then I fed the zip tie up and was able to use this to help kind of guide and pull. And then I hooked it, and it's going to be difficult to see right at the moment, right here to the post. Basically, it's the equivalent of this post right here, and hooked it there. So it's on and looks really, really good. So the front one is done. That middle divider is back on. Like I said, go ahead and put those 3 bolts back in. They can be a little bit of a challenge, but just get them back in. And my towel came out, so let me tuck that back in there for a sec. You're like, hey, where'd your towel go? Missing a towel in the center intake right now too. But as you can see, it made great progress. Now, take the lessons that you've learned from the front, go ahead and apply it to the back. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set it down and feed it down and around. You've got to feed this part down and under the actuator. And then, you know, same thing with the springs. I'm going to do the same thing here, where I'm probably going to set a spring here and run it all the way around the back to here. I'm going to set a spring here, run it all the way around and hook it up to here. And I'll be good to go. So let's get the back on, and we are more than halfway done. All right, y'all, so both are in and seated with the springs in place. And I found, actually, let me show you a trick. I actually chained multiple zip ties together. So I have a tiny loop at this end, which is attached to the free end of the spring. You know, I attach the spring to the blanket. This attaches to the free end, and I chained multiple zip ties together because they're very strong. And they've got a little bit of tensile strength, so I can feed them around. So like, for example, feeding them behind the exhaust headers on both sides was much easier with these. On the backs, I fed a long one through all the way around and then looped it on the spring and drug it all the way back. Drug it under here, and it's connected right there. It's behind the charge pipe outlet right there, right at the moment, or inlet. But that's how I got the one behind. Same thing down below. Routed it under the actuator, tucked it really tight all the way around, and then ran the zip tie all the way up, grabbed it, pulled it, helped adjust the cover, pull it up to be around the top of the charge pipe, and then brought the spring around, which is hard to see, but it's actually right there. So both are on completely. I still have my zip ties on this side because I just kind of wanted to show you what it looks like. I'll crawl underneath so you can see what it looks like from underneath as well. I really don't see any way to do this just from the top because there's so much adjustment that has to be done from underneath. And I'll probably say it again, but just like I mentioned earlier, you know, if you're changing your charge pipes, now's a great time to do it. If you're going to change your downpipes, this would have made it even easier. So your downpipes down below, which, you know, I already have my project video out on that, and I've put in the Active Auto Work downpipes. If I'd combined this with the downpipes, I would have had the downpipes out of the way, and it certainly would have given me more space to work, especially on the back one. So consider doing that. Consider combining projects while you do this. Okay, so let me crawl underneath. Let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to make sure to get these zip ties off. You don't want any hot plastic next to all this. And then we're going to start putting the car back together, and we'll be done. All right, y'all, so one last check here from underneath, checking on orientation. We're looking towards the front of the car and the front skid plate. So as we look up here, we can see the underside of where it hits the exhaust manifold. You can see where it comes down and around the downpipe here for the back. The front is a little bit harder to see, but we'll see if we can see up in there at least a little bit. You can see the texture of the blanket around the downpipe there. So all in all, I used 2 springs each, which seemed more than enough to hold it into place. Seems like it's doing a great job. Okay, so now we just need to button up. So I'm gonna button up the bottom here. I'm gonna put the stiffening plate back on and get all that set, because that's all I need to do from underneath. So I'm gonna put that back on with all the 8mm and the 16s to hold the stiffening plate on, and then I can lower the car and we'll put the top back together. I'll show you that. And we're in wrap up and clean up. All right, y'all, have to forgive any background noise. It's another busy day in my neighborhood. So it's time to reinstall the drip rail. It's going to use those same T30s to put it back into place. Don't forget, all the way back in the back, you actually have the cable run that goes down to one of your O2 sensors, clips right back here. It's a little bit hard to show, but you had to have pulled that off to get your drip rail out. So make sure to put that back into place, put this on. I also use this opportunity to clean my drip rail, and put all those back on. And then you can clip these wires also back into place on the drip rail where they've got their little clips here that go on. You also have this wire that clips up here as well. So get your drip rail back on, get all your wires back in place, and then we're going to start putting the intakes back in. Okay, so obviously I threw the towels back in because the last thing you want to do is, you know, drop a last minute bolt into one of your turbos and then have to fish that out. That would be a drag. But let me pull the towels here for a second, just so you can get a good clean look. So the drip rail's on, all the cabling is back into all their little clips where it's supposed to go, and basically the turbo blankets look really good, and the drip rail is going to do a good job in keeping the top down as well, because it definitely kind of slides in there right on top of the blankets. So all in all, looks really, really good. Double check your actuators, make sure that they still, you know, are exactly how they should be, and your blankets aren't rubbing on them at all or hanging them up. Just double check that, because that's the one moving part I'd be a little concerned about. And in this case, just make sure that it's around that intake enough that the intake's going to get on just fine. The charge pipe's going to get on just fine. But okay, so now just reinstall your charge pipes. What I find is easiest is to set the low end, bring the top end up, and then wiggle it in. Sorry, off frame. Put the low end in, and then wiggle the top end in, and get it all set before you put the hose clamp on. But all right, so one quick thing before I put the airbox intake back on, and you can see both ends of your charge pipes. So a couple of things. One, make sure your charge pipes actually go into the little grommets they sit on. And then again, make sure you've got them well seated here at the top and well seated here at the bottom. Now, the one thing I double checked here on the back on this one, now that this turbo blanket is here, I wanted to make sure that it didn't get pinched when the pipe came down, and I think it might have just a little bit. So I pulled at it and made sure to get my finger in between to separate anything out, so the turbo blanket wasn't impinging at all on the charge pipe when it came down. It really sucked to do all this work and end up with a boost leak, right? So just double check those, make sure that they're right, and you should be good to go. We're going to put the intake pipe back on, or the airbox pipe with the 10mm, put the airbox back in. And the airbox is really simple. It's just reverse of how you took it out. So just take it, tip it into place, drop it down, make sure that it fits on your air intake pipe here, and it fits down into all the grommets, and it fits onto your intake pipe, and then tighten down the hose clamp. Your engine vanity cover can go back on, then we'll put our strut brace back on, and so on. But we're in cleanup mode, and we're close to done. All right, so the airbox is back in. Make sure to plug in your MAF right there, because you should have unplugged that. Make sure it's plugged back in. I want to go ahead and put my vanity cover on. And then go ahead and put these top plastics just in the way right at the moment, in the center, because we're going to put the strut bar back on. What I usually do is I will feed it in through that side and then lay it down on that side. Again, be aware of your positive battery post if you didn't cover it. And then put those 13s back in. Remember, long 13s in the back, too short 13s in the front. Don't mix and match. Okay, so go ahead and put your strut brace back on, put your back plastics back on, and then make sure you don't have any bolts or anything left over, because you're done at that point. Well done, you guys. This is not an easy project, but it's one that's definitely worth it. All right, y'all, so you should be all done and cleaned up at this point. As you can tell, this is a little bit more intricate of a DIY, but it's really not all that hard. Doesn't take any complicated tools, just takes some time and some patience. I think it's going to make a huge difference, and make sure to check out the videos that Funk has put out. There's some really great videos out there showing what turbo blankets can do for your car. So I'm really excited to have this personally. Thank you to Funk for making such a fantastic product. Funk Motorsports is great, and they make all kinds of things, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on what I might wrap my charge pipe and some other stuff, but we'll see. So thank you to them for making such a fantastic high quality product. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching my video. Please click subscribe and the little alarm bell down at the bottom. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you on my next video.